Well, good morning, everyone in Australia, and good evening to those of you listening across America tonight. It's Easter Friday here in Australia, and it's a bright, beautiful autumn day. Quite nice indeed. We don't have any guests on the show this week because it's Easter Friday in Australia, and I thought I'd give everyone a break. So you have my company for the next 50 minutes or so. If you'd like to pop on over to my website and see my latest blog, it's tonilontis.com, TONILONTIS.com. You can follow me on my Facebook page at Toni Lontis, my Instagram, Toni M. Lontis, LinkedIn, Toni Lontis, and on Twitter at Toni Lontis. So let's get the show underway with the big news this week. The biggest news this week is from Europe and France, where we all heard the terrible news that a major fire had engulfed the medieval Cathedral of the Notre Dame in the centre of Paris. The Notre Dame is one of France's most famous landmarks. It's an 850-year-old Gothic building, and its spire and roof collapsed, but the main structure of the building, including its two bell towers, should be able to be saved. Firefighters worked extensively to contain the blaze, and while teams tried to salvage the artwork that was stored inside. The President, Emmanuel Macron, called it a tragedy. The cause of the fire is not yet clear, and officials say it could be linked to renovation work that had begun after cracks appeared in the stone, sparking fears the structure had become unstable. They think at this stage that the fire was an accidental fire with no one assuming any blame. It certainly spread very quickly, with the fire beginning around 8:30 p.m. It quickly reached the roof of the cathedral, destroying its stained glass windows and wooden interior before toppling its famous spire. Some 500 firefighters worked to prevent the bell towers from collapsing. More than 4 hours later, they considered that the structure had been saved and preserved from total destruction. During the preceding weeks before the fire, the building was under extensive renovation, and 16 copper statues had luckily been removed last week. It's a valuable heritage structure in Paris, and there has been an outpouring of grief since the fire. Thousands of people have gathered in the streets around the cathedral, openly crying, singing hymns and saying prayers. Several churches around Paris rang their bells in response to the blaze, which happened as Catholics celebrate Holy Week. The only solace that you might take from the horrific fire is that it's really merely the last chapter in a long and violent history of destruction and despair. The cathedral was heavily damaged by rioters in the 16th century, remodelled by successive kings, and roundly plundered during the French Revolution, where 28 statues of biblical figures were mistaken for French kings and beheaded. The cathedral is also famous for Victor Hugo's 1831 novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, that brought the cathedral's plight to widespread attention, raising alarm that the mutilations, amputations and dislocations of the structure and its Gothic architecture were disintegrating before everyone's eyes. His writing spurred on calls for a full restoration, which was eventually undertaken and in 1845. For the next 25 years, the Notre Dame was moulded according to the architect's own romantic vision, adding elaborate layers of ornaments and decorative statues entirely of his own invention. The spire was indeed made of 500 tonnes of wood and includes 250 tonnes of lead, and it was a far cry from the previous tower. The architect concocted a fantasy menagerie of apostles and mythical creatures, and these were placed around the building. Other notes of interest around the Notre Dame include Sigmund Freud, who first saw it in 1885. Freud described it as a sensation I had never had before. Whilst he was studying neurology, he kept returning to the Notre Dame every free afternoon to just stand in its presence. There were numerous post-war movies set in Paris using the Notre Dame as an establishing shot. It was a background in Breathless. It featured in some Gene Kelly dance sequence. Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn walked past it in The Charade. The most stunning and now eerily nod to its truest attraction was the setting of Richard Linklater's Before Sunset, which reunited lovers Jesse and Celine, and they ponder in front of the cathedral. The most sensational use of the Notre Dame is, of course, The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1939, based on Victor Hugo's novel, which sees a lonely and lovelorn Quasimodo, the cathedral's bell ringer, try to rescue Esmeralda from a public hanging for witchcraft. Indeed, there is a lot of history around the witches being burnt at the stake at the Notre Dame during that evil time in history. The Muppet Show, famously in 1981, opened with a number featuring a blue-headed, green-haired chap called Mulch performing the role of Quasimodo. He climbed the bell tower of the Notre Dame and sang a love song. Through the episode, the special guest, Deborah Harry, performed her hit, Blondie's One Way or Another. Television's relationship with the Parisian landmark has switched vicariously from comedy to gothic horror. In 2016, The Simpsons episode To Courier with Love has a family flying to Paris because Homer has to work as a courier transporting an endangered Amazon blue constrictor snake into the country for reasons too bizarre to get into. One night in Paris, while Bart is fishing in the scene and Homer dons his turtleneck and with Marge strolls past the cathedral. Admiring the gargoyles, Homer remarks, "That's from when religion knew how to scare the crap out of you." And yet Homer had a point. The Notre Dame's function on TV has often been to scare the crap out of its audience and provide a backdrop for Gothic programming. There's a lot of artistic wonder that surrounds the Notre Dame, and a lot of the most recent gamers have used the Notre Dame in the game architecture for the background of their games. In video games, the architecture is more for set dressing, when a player can move through a piece of art, examine it, touch, move, and interact with it visually, as well as in the composition of virtual spaces. The buildings become as vital as the experience as code, sound, and visual design. Game designers, like architects, is that expressing something through space. A great many video game creatives show a weakness for imposing beautiful Gothic architecture in their work. Echoes of the Notre Dame can be seen in games from the horror of Bloodborne to the arch fantasy of World of Warcraft. And for Assassin's Creed, a historical game set in the French Revolution, an environmental artist called Caroline spent the best part of 2 years recreating the Notre Dame Cathedral in its virtual 18th century Paris, working from old maps of the city and sketches and photographs. The Notre Dame didn't have its spires at the time she based her game, but in a concession to the modern player's mental image of the iconic building, you can climb right up to the top of the cathedral, survey the city below, and from inside you can see the paintings that were hanging on the walls 250 years ago. Experiencing the cathedral in-game, having seen as the flesh, evokes a powerful, intimate sense of deja vu. You can't touch its ancient stone in the game, of course, but in real you can. So some interesting history about the witches, and actually the Knights of Templar were burned for crimes of heresy and witchcraft at the Notre Dame. in the 1300s. What a terrible way to die. Interesting facts include the church receives almost 13 million visitors each year, and that's more than the Eiffel Tower. And it also features, have statues in the facade of the cathedral. Cathedral were removed just before renovation. Making news in Australia this morning is the news that a 14-month-old child has been dragged from his camper van by a dingo on Fraser Island. Fraser Island is just off the east coast of Australia and is known for its huge population of wild dingoes. These small and vicious little animals are known to rob from campsites, but we've had the terrifying event this morning where a 14-month-old child was dragged from inside a sleeping bag and out onto the campsite. His parents found him, called the paramedic, and the child was airlifted to a local hospital and has since been airlifted to a major children's hospital with deep lacerations to the back of his head and neck. I feel really sorry for his parents this morning. What a terrible trauma to happen to them at Easter time. In further news in Australia, a couple has been rescued from a swamp in northern Australia after riding help in the mud to attract attention. The two were on a fishing trip in the Keep River National Park, Northern Territory, when their car became bogged. The couple and their puppy, Ace, were forced to spend Sunday night in the vehicle but said they feared the rising tide would bring crocodiles. They were later rescued by a search team after being missing for 26 hours. Not the best place to be stuck, where there are huge 5 and 6 metre crocodiles abounding. They tried digging the car out, but unfortunately they couldn't. The tyres were stuck fast. They had plenty of water, but were still grateful to be rescued nevertheless. In other tragic news this week, a pet deer has gnawed a man to death and seriously injured his wife in a rare attack in Australia. We don't have a lot of pet deer in Australia, and this couple kept the stag on their property in Victoria where the attack happened on Wednesday morning. The woman suffered life-threatening injuries after going to her husband's aid, and she was flown to a hospital for treatment. This is a rare attack in Australia and a very sad thing to happen again just before Easter. In Africa, they have found a giant mammal-like animal that is bigger than a polar bear and the oldest known member of a group of extinct mammals called hyenoids, so named due to their dental resemblance to hyenas, even though the groups are also unrelated. The lower jaw, teeth and bones of the animal were found in a museum in Kenya's capital of Nairobi. Based on its massive teeth, the Simbawaka was a specialised hypercarnivore that was significantly larger than the modern lion and possibly larger than a polar bear. What a scary thought that is. The findings of these colleagues were published in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology. Times this week has listed the 100 most influential people in the world, with Democrat Hillary Clinton living proof that when it comes to getting a job done, more often than not, it takes a woman. Musician Shawn Mendes wrote of Swift that Taylor Swift makes people feel older and then young again. The issue is compromised short of tributes written by fellow global luminaries throughout all industries. Beyoncé penned an essay on former First Lady Michelle Obama, President Donald Trump, and Special Counsel Rob Mueller also made this year's list. Interestingly enough, this Friday we can expect a pink moon for Easter celebrations. The term pink moon refers to a full moon that occurs in April and is named after the pink spring flower that appears at the same time. Well, springtime in America, autumn time in Australia. The name is slightly deceiving because the moon won't look pink but a slightly pale orange. Stargazers in the UK should be able to spot the orange-pink moon around 8:05 p.m. For one night only. People in the rest of Europe and North America will also be able to see it. The moon should slowly turn yellow as it gets higher in the sky. The pink moon came about due to the spring flower called the wild ground phlox, which is very pink and appears in the US about the same time as April's full moon. The natural phenomenon is always linked to the date of Easter because it appears after the spring equinox. You may think the term pink moon is confusing, but the very same celestial phenomenon can also be referred to as the egg moon, the full sprouting grass moon, the growing moon, or the full fish moon. The pink moon will look orange as it rises until when it is a full moon and seen low in the sky, and it can be viewed through the greater thickness of the Earth's atmosphere. The Earth's oxygen and nitrogen atmosphere fibres out the blue wavelengths of the white moonlight when the moon is close to the horizon as it rises. This filtering process, known as light refraction, results in a more red component of the moonlight travelling directly into your eye. Therefore, the moon will appear red or orange to you. The moon can only really appear to have turned pink during a total lunar eclipse, which is often referred to as a blood moon. The next half blood moon is set to take place in July this year and should be visible from some parts of Europe, Africa, Asia and the Middle East. I can't wait to see the photos of this. So one of my callers today says it's sad about the mess going on in the world. What can we do to make it better? Well, I'm sure that there's lots of things that we as individuals can do in our own small hemisphere, but I do believe that it'll take strong leadership from across the world to right some of the mistakes we're making around climate change, wars, peace. Those things are the greater issues that I think require a level of leadership that we're not seeing in the world today. How can people find out more about world news? Well, my go-to is always Google, and I have a number of websites that are my preference. So I actually like BBC, worldnews.com and a few of the Australian sites. But often I find myself going back to a site called Snopes.com. Snopes.com is great for weeding out all those conspiracy theories, which leads me to a Facebook thread on my feed this week about mosquito drones. And there were lots of people getting really upset about the prospect of being spied on and having their DNA taken from mosquito drones. So I entered into that thread conversation and was wondering what all the hoo-ha was about. And so I then went on to Snopes to check out what they were saying about these so-called mosquito robots, and found a lot of interesting information. So is there such a mosquito? Well, no. It's an insect spy drone for urban areas, and it's already in production, funded by the US government. It can be remotely controlled and is equipped with a camera and a microphone. It can land on you, and it may have potential to take DNA sample and leave an RFID tracking nanotechnology on your skin. It could fly through the window, and it could attach to your clothing and you could take it into your home. The problem with these things is that in one of the current areas of research undertaken in the scientific military field is the development of these micro air vehicles, or MAVs, tiny flying objects intended to go to places that cannot safely be reached by humans or other types of equipment. One of the primary military applications envisioned for MAVs is gathering intelligence. And some extreme applications posted for each of these devices was to be used as small swarm weapons that could be launched en masse against enemy forces. Some of the effects of the MAV research is involving them trying to mimic the flight of birds. So in actual fact, these MABs are more like having a 3-centimetre wingspan. So you're going to see them. They're not small like mosquitoes, more the size of a huge bumblebee or a butterfly. The US government deemed that they had not researched or developed insect-like MABs for several years, as they proved to be useless in terms of any real information gathering. And in terms of aerodynamically, they are difficult to fly and they are difficult to manage in that size. So that's it for me. I'm going to have another break and I'll join you again after that, and we will talk some more world news. Okay, over to a break. Thanks. And you're back listening to Radio Toni Live. Before the break, we were talking about some of the conspiracy theories and hoaxes on the internet at the moment, and another one that sparked my interest was the photo of a pack of wolves that says something about, do the oldest and weakest wolves really lead the pack? The photograph of a wolf pack is commonly shared with an inaccurate description of the behaviour of wolves. In December 2015, a photograph of a wolf pack marching through the snow began circulating via Facebook, along with an inaccurate description about its hierarchy. A wolf pack, the first 3 are the old or sick. They give the pace to the entire pack. If it was the other way around, they would have been left behind, losing contact with the pack. In case of any ambush, they would be sacrificed. Then come the 5 strong ones, the front line. In the centre are the rest of the pack members, then the 5 strongest following. Last alone, the alpha. He controls everything from the rear. In that position, he can see everything, decide the direction, he sees all of the pack, and the pack moves according to the elders' pace and help each other and watch out for each other. So despite the image's popularity, however, the attached description of the inner workings of a wolf pack is inaccurate. The photograph shown was taken by Chadden Hunter, who featured on the BBC documentary Frozen Planet in 2011, with its original description explaining that the alpha female led the pack and that the rest of the wolves followed in her tracks in order to save energy. A massive pack of 25 timber wolves hunting bison on the Arctic Circle in northern Canada in the midwinter. In Wild Buffalo National Park, temperatures hover around negative 40 degrees Celsius. The wolf pack, led by the alpha female, travels single file through the deep snow to save energy. The size of the pack is a sign of how rich their prey base is during winter, when the bison are more restricted by poor feeding and deep snow. The wolf packs in this national park are the only wolves in the world that specialise in hunting bison 10 times their size. They have grown to be the largest and most powerful wolves on the earth. While this description is more accurate than the one shared on the viral Facebook post, some researchers would nevertheless dispute the use of the word alpha. In David Meck's 1999 paper Alpha Status, Dominance and Division of Labour in Wolf Packs, he argued that the concept of an alpha wolf who asserts his or her dominance over the pack members doesn't actually exist in the wild. Labelling a high-ranking wolf alpha emphasises its rank in a dominance hierarchy. However, in natural wolf packs, the alpha male or female are merely the breeding animals, the parents of the pack, and the dominance contests with other wolves are rare, if they exist at all. During 13 summers observing Ellesmere Island pack, he saw none. Thus, calling a wolf an alpha is usually no more appropriate than referring to a human parent or a doe deer as an alpha. Any parent is dominant to its young offspring, so alpha adds no information. Why not refer to the alpha female as the female parent, the breeding female, the matriarch, or simply the mother? Such a designation emphasises not the animal's dominant status, which is trivial information, but its role as a pack progenitor, or the one that produces the babies, which is the critical information according to the pack. This photo is real in the sense that it shows the pack of wolves in the Wood Buffalo National Park, but the pack is not being led by the 3 oldest members or trailed by the alpha male wolf, as implied by the viral Facebook post. Instead, one of the stronger animals leads the group in order to create a path through the snow for them. So simply not true to that Facebook scam. Another scam floating around Facebook at the moment is that a mobile phone's Bluetooth sensor can be used to detect card skimmers. This viral Facebook post gives readers advice on how to avoid having their credit card stolen while refueling, and this is particularly true at fueling stations. So what's true? The Bluetooth sensor in a mobile phone is a potentially useful way to detect and lower the risk of exposure to some common kinds of credit card skimmers. And what's false? A mobile phone's Bluetooth sensor won't detect all kinds of credit card skimmers, and it's prone to false negatives and false positives. Social media users are never slow to tip off each other on new and ongoing scams and frauds, but as we've examined over many years, they're likewise keen to share novel ways to counteract those scams and frauds. In February 2019, the Facebook post offers readers advice, and it was to pull up at a gas station to fill your car, search your phone for Bluetooth devices. If a sequence of letters or a sequence of numbers shows up in your device list, do not pay at the pump. One of the pumps may have a card reader installed. All card readers are Bluetooth. This warning was somewhat of a crude explanation of the real phenomenon. A Bluetooth sensor on a mobile phone can indeed be used to detect some, though by no means all, credit card scammers at gas pumps and ATMs. The warning is related to a particular kind of credit card scammer that is placed in a credit card reader at an ATM or a gas station pump. When a customer inserts their card into the reader, the transaction takes place as normal. The customer's credit card is debited, but the skimmer also extracts all the relevant data from the magnetic stripe on the card, including the credit card number, expiry date, and security codes. The thieves who planted the scammer can then return to the machine and use the Bluetooth transmitter to transfer the stored credit card details from the scanner to a storage device such as a mobile phone or a laptop, all without having to physically remove the scammer. So it's partially true, but not completely true. And it may also give you a false positive saying that there is a scammer there when in true fact there's not a scammer. In conclusion, on the whole, the 2019 Facebook post was a fairly crude explanation of what is nevertheless a real phenomenon. A mobile phone's Bluetooth sensor can indeed be used to scan for and detect Bluetooth modules known as credit card scammers, but it will not always give you a foolproof result. So I've got a question here. All those cell phones are a way for the governments to track us. Well, they're only a way for the government to track you if you're using your mobile phone. If it's not open to Wi-Fi and you're switched off on Bluetooth, they can't track anything, as far as I know. Also making news this week is the rise in the epidemic of measles across the world. So Australia was once considered one of the continents in the world where 5 years ago measles was considered eradicated. Unfortunately, Australia is now one of the countries that features highly in outbreaks of measles. In Madagascar, the island off of Africa, they had 1,200 cases of measles in the last month. They've also had in the tens of thousands of deaths from measles. So I just want to remind people that measles still has the capacity to kill. It's not a mild childhood disease. It can cause pregnant women to spontaneously abort their babies, and it can seriously damage children and infants who have contracted measles and are unvaccinated. I'm wondering, as many other world leaders are, that the anti-vaccine establishment has caused incredible scaremongering throughout parents, and they are refusing to vaccinate their children, and this is a very sad state of affairs. I'm not here to argue the pros and cons of vaccination at large, but except to say that a measles vaccination will prevent you getting measles, full stop. And a reminder that measles is one of the most contagious diseases on the planet. And if you're unvaccinated and come in contact with someone who has measles, you are likely to catch measles because it's so highly contagious. So that's it for another little break. We'll throw to another ad and I'll be back after the break. Hi, and you're back with Radio Toni. One of my lovely listeners has had a question about measles and saying, I thought it was eradicated. Yes, for all intents and purposes, it has been thought that measles was eradicated in the last few years. However, we've seen the rise of the anti-vaccination squad, and lots of people are deciding not to vaccinate their children. And the problem with that is that vaccination requires a herd immunity. So for us to eradicate measles, that's on the presumption that everyone is vaccinated, and those who can be vaccinated are. Now, there are some people who are genuinely allergic or have a condition whereby they can't be vaccinated. For those people, they don't have the option. But for the rest of us who can be vaccinated, we should be vaccinated at the very least for measles, because it's so contagious and because it's so deadly. So I'm just about out of time today, which is surprising for me. Next week on my show, I have our guest back, and I'll be talking to the lovely Francesca Jordan. Now, Francesca is a Reiki master and a master's in social work. She's had her own practice for approximately 30 years. She's an internationally recognised counsellor, speaker, author, and healer. Francesca was trained in Australia and internationally, and she's worked in Africa, Europe, Latin America, Asia, and India, I think. She's published numerous articles and books in the areas of health, psychiatry, welfare, spirituality, and healing. And she's also been the voice of love in A Corridor of Lost Steps, Better Care for People with Alzheimer's Disease, and Help for Caregivers. She's also now writing her mother Isabella Jordan's memoir, which will be fabulous. Francesca has been working in welfare, health, and the academic field for a very long time. She's a trainer, a psychotherapist, and a hypnotherapist. She comes to us for an interview, and we're hoping to talk about some interesting subjects like the guilt versus shame discussion. We also want to talk about brain and brain trauma and some of the inroads that clinicians are making in reprogramming our brains after trauma. We also want to talk about how trauma affects the brain. So anyone who has had a major trauma in their life will know without a doubt that their brain doesn't function the same way as it used to. So we want to talk about how to recognise those changes in our brain, and also how we can help ourselves and what form that healing takes in our lives when we've been affected by trauma. So I will be back next week with the lovely Francesca, and we will be doing an interview. Also, I thought I'd let you know that in May, starting from the 2nd of May, Radio Toni will be going to a 2-hour time slot. So the same time, 7 p.m. Thursdays, but instead of just 50-minute time slot, I will be going for a 2-hour time slot in which I'll do the same format, but we will be able to talk to our expert guests a bit longer, and we'll be able to ask lots more questions of those expert guests. And I'm hoping that will be enjoyable for listeners, and you'll be able to call in and interact on chat with our experts. So I'm almost out of time again. I'm wishing you all a very safe and happy Easter, and I can't wait to join with you next week with our guest Francesca to talk about brain and brain trauma. And all the best. Have a wonderful Easter, and bye from Radio Toni.